Hey guys, it's Julian here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make melodic techno synths like Stephan Bodzin. Now, as usual, you can get the project file and samples and Midi and presets and anything related to that for this video in the description. And yeah, let's get started. So the first sound we have here is this bass, which sounds like this. So this is kind of like a pretty typical, like, juicy, sort of melodic techno, Stephan Bodzin style bass. The way that I made it was with Ableton's analog. So what we have going on here is I have two saw waves. You can see the second one is an octave down, and then the first one is detuned a little bit. So doing stuff like this is kind of nice because it still gives you like that nice kind of saw wave sound, but it's just a little bit of a different vibe than like if we just had these in the same octave with no detuning. Like, that's still nice. But this just feels a little bit more interesting. So then I have those going into a low pass filter, which has an envelope on it. You can see I have the envelope set like this. So it's just kind of doing like a little pluck. It's not like super quick. You can hear like on that long note, it's just long enough where it sort of dives down during that, and then yeah, that's that. And then after that we have the amp envelope set like that, so pretty similar. And then finally in analog here, I have a bit of unison, so just using that to kind of get a big sort of like chorusy type of sound. Like if I turn that off, it would still work, but it doesn't feel as like powerful as that does. So yeah, so that's it for inside of analog. After that, I have first off this frequency shifter, and you can see what we have going on here is I haven't changed any of the controls except for the dry wet. So this is actually an old trick that I learned from making like neurofunk drum and bass style basses. But it's really cool for these kind of sounds too. Basically, what you do is you use this frequency shifter, and if you just start playing with the dry wet, like if we have it at basically 100% wet, it's just gonna sound like that, like normal. But if we start turning the dry wet down just a little bit, you can hear it gives you that cool kind of like sort of scooped mids style sound where it's not like got that kind of like warm low mid anymore. It's hard to explain, but the reason why I like doing it with this instead of an EQ, because obviously by me breaking it down right there, what it's doing, you can see, I know that this is not any kind of special effect. Like, this is just cutting some frequencies out of the sound. The thing is, I honestly don't know exactly how it's doing it, but it just sounds a little better than trying to do this with EQ. Like, I spent a bit of time trying to sort of, you know, get some of those frequencies out of there with an EQ, and yeah, it just always sounds better when I do this. So definitely a cool tip there. After that, we have a bit of chorus just to give it some more kind of like depth. Like I was saying, you know, I wanted a big chorusy kind of bass. So putting chorus on top of that was definitely not too out of the question. Then after that I have a saturator, which you can see is going pretty heavy. I have the drive, and then I have the wave shaper on, so it's just kind of like giving the sound more power and shaping it sonically a little bit. Here's what it sounds like without it. And then with it, so yeah, it's definitely adding a lot of power to the sound. And then finally, we just had this auto pan, which is doing this sort of fake sidechain. And I got a few requests about this one because I talked about this in a couple of my more recent tutorials. But basically what we're doing here is I'm using this auto pan to do something kind of similar actually to what like LFO Tool or Kickstart would do. It's just sort of doing like a simulated sidechain. So sometimes when you sidechain things to a kick, it can be a little bit weird because like the kick, you know, every kick is sort of a different length, and they're not always going to sound that good sidechaining things because sometimes if they're too long, it ducks it out too much, and it's just kind of like a nightmare sometimes. So I like to use like AutoPan or LFO Tool or anything like that. In this case, I'm just using AutoPan. And yeah, so what I have here is I just have the phase on 0, and then we have the rate set to quarter notes, and then I have it set on the saw waveform, and it's inverted, so that's what's giving it the kind of like pump there. And yeah, if you set it to quarter notes, it's a really convincing kind of sidechain effect. It works really well. So yeah, so that's the bass. Next thing that we have here is this sort of like pad, which sounds like this. So the way that I made this was with operator. It's using FM synthesis. I'll just show you the notes really quick. It's playing a G minor dyad, meaning just these two notes, the first, the root note, and the third. And yeah, really nothing too special there. It's just playing those simple notes. It kind of just hangs on those. And you can hear like it gives more depth to the chord progressions. So basically what we have in here with operator is I have 2 sine waves. The second one is up 4 to 4 on the coarse pitch, and you can see I have the level set there. So it's doing a bit of FM. And then I have those going into a bandpass filter. And what the bandpass filter is doing is it's being modulated by this LFO. So the LFO, yeah, you can see it's just moving the filter frequency. And that's what's giving it that kind of like wah sort of sound. So yeah, so that's it for inside of operator. It's pretty simple. But then after that, I have the saturator, and you can see kind of went in with this one, just like on the bass. Again, similar thing. Like it's just kind of making it warmer, and it's allowing me to sort of shape the sound a little bit. Like with this wave shaper down here, basically with the drive, that's what I'm using to sort of add some grit and like warmth to the sound. And then with the wave shaper down here, that is kind of where the like sonic shaping is going on. So you can see I played around with the little filter here, and I played around with the bass frequency and just a few of the settings over here as well. And again, it just kind of allows you to like shape the sound a little bit after the synth. So then after that, I just have a bit of reverb for some space. You can see it's pretty short. Since it's just holding out, I didn't want it to be too like overbearing. And then finally, I just have an auto pan doing another sort of fake sidechain. So then the next thing that we have here is this little arpeggio, which sounds like this. So what this is it's this little synth I made with analog, which I'll speak about in a second. But showing you the notes really quick, basically it's playing this arp, and you can see, yeah, so it's just kind of going down and then back up and then down again. Like it's kind of like a V or a W or like I guess a really long sort of ramp or something. But basically, yeah, like what this is doing is it's just playing this little thing. I guess you could say that the pattern restarts here. The way that I did it was basically I made a pattern that was this long, so it was just this, basically like a W without that top thing, and then I just duplicated that over a bunch of times. And what you get from that is a very interesting effect because it creates an irregular pattern. We're used to this track working in sort of patterns of like a bar or 2 bars, or I guess it would be 2 bars because of the bass line. But yeah, like we're used to it being like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, next part, 1, 2, 3, 4. But what you do when you introduce this sort of like offbeat pattern here, or this sort of like random pattern where you can see it's restarting here. This is where if I duplicate this, the next note would start there, and then the next note would start there. It's never starting on the same count. Essentially, you just get kind of like this extra sort of depth to your music. Like it sounds just a lot more interesting because you're hearing it, and there's something irregular that you're hearing that's still working really, really well with the track because of the harmonic stuff and like the way the notes work with everything else. But yeah, just kind of, I like these irregular patterns. It's a really, really cool way to add a lot of interesting stuff to your tracks. And Stephan Bodzin definitely does this a ton as well, as do like pretty much all of the other melodic techno and melodic house artists. So yeah, so then for the sound on that one, I have analog. So what I did was I have a square wave, and you can see I have this little pitch envelope on it. You can kind of hear that. If I turn it off, you can hear it's just kind of like bland. This is just one of those little things that you do sort of in the background that adds like a little bit of kind of just extra depth to your sound. And then I have a bit of white noise as well. And then those two are going to a low pass filter with an envelope on it. I have the amplitude envelope set similarly. And then after that, I have a bit of vibrato just for some kind of like movement in the pitch. And yeah, then after that, what I have is I have the saturator, which I'm using a bit of drive to kind of warm it up a bit. And then also I'm using the wave shaper very similarly to how I use it on the bass and the pad to just kind of like shape it sonically. Like I've been talking about this a lot on here lately. The saturator, if you see me using the wave shaper, I'm not using it for distortion. Like in this case, I am using it a little bit for distortion because you can see I'm using the drive to kind of make the sound warmer and a little bit more gritty. But the wave shaper is actually just like a really scientific way of sort of shaping your sounds. Like it's just a way of going in and having essentially control over every aspect of it. Like usually, you know, to get like a cool sound, you would use like some distortion or some kind of weird like echo or something like that. But here, I kind of like just using a wave shaper to like go in and, like I said, like really affect the sound. So that's what I'm doing with that. And yeah, you can hear it's just kind of like adding more grit to the sound and more kind of like character. So then after that, speaking of more character, I have this echo, and yeah, that's pretty much what this is here for. Basically, it's just doing a pretty like quick delay, and it's just adding that kind of like sort of dirty echo kind of like character to the sound. I know Stephan Bodzin, he uses a lot of hardware, and he uses a lot of like analog stuff that is just kind of nice, kind of has like that sort of analog texture to it. So doing stuff like this really helps to achieve that. And so the way I set this up is I just have the two different ears, the left and the right ear, on two different times. So it gives it kind of like a cool stereo effect because you're hearing a separate thing in each ear essentially. And then I don't have too much on the dry wet there. This is just on there for a little bit of extra flavor. Then after that, I just have a bit of reverb for some space. And then an EQ8 cutting out the low end. And then finally, just this auto pan, which is doing the same sort of fake sidechain thing you heard on all the other sounds. So then the next thing that I have here is this 808 tom, which sounds like this. So yeah, this is just playing like this little sort of thing. It's just playing A sharp and G, so just the root of the chord of the root of the key the song is in basically, and then the third. And yeah, it's just playing like a simple kind of like rhythmic and melodic thing. Like something I've noticed in a lot of melodic techno, and especially in Stephan Bodzin's music, is that it's like a lot of the elements aren't just melodic. Like a lot of the melodic elements aren't just melodic basically. Sometimes you have things that are kind of like also rhythmic. Like this bass line I would say is pretty rhythmic, because it's so dynamic and it's changing so much. And I would say the ARP is very rhythmic as well. And this is also just kind of like adding to that. Like it's just playing this little thing where it's rhythmic as well as melodic. So the way that I made the sound was, like I said, it's just an 808 tom. I just put it in here. And then what I did was I played around with the pitch here, because if you notice what happens if I just turn off this detune here and play it is, you can see, okay, there we go. You can see it's not perfectly on that little dot there. So it's not perfectly in tune, basically. Yeah, you can see that again. So what I did was I basically just used this detune to compensate for that. There we go. Sometimes, I'm not sure why that's happening, but sometimes it registers, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, you can see. So what I did to compensate for that was, like I said, I just used this detune, and I just put it up, I think it was like 21 cents. And yeah, there we go. So it's in key, and it's not so much of a problem. And this is the thing that I think a lot of people run into, because a lot of times, and I used to have this as well before I knew this technique, is like you can use these 808 toms and they sound cool and melodic when you're just playing them, but then when you try to play them with other things, they sound really out of tune, and it seems like it's impossible to get them in tune. And this is why, is because you need to go in with the tuner and just sort of play around with the detune there to get it to get it perfectly in pitch. Now as far as effects go on the sound, I really don't have anything other than this reverb. The thing is, like, the 808 tom already kind of has a cool texture to it. It already kind of sounds like how I wanted it to sound. There's not really a whole lot to be done to it, so I just kind of wanted to add the reverb to give it some space. So that's pretty much it for this one. I also have this kick and this shaker here. Just like some simple stuff. If you get the project file, you can play around with those. But yeah, so I mostly just wanted to make this one and show you guys some techniques. Like I said, like all this stuff about sort of the rhythmic, melodic things, as well as just like techniques to give your sounds more of that kind of like analog sound like Stephan Bodzin has. So that's gonna be it for today, guys. Make sure to let me know what you think of this video in the comments, and make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. You can get the project file and samples and MIDI and presets from this video in the description, and you can also check out my social media, which is on screen right now in the description. Thank you again, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another tutorial.